Jennifer Weinman, and I'm part of the Bridge the Gap team. And we do a lot of work helping children to understand more about their emotions, because that's really important to protect our health and our well-being. So the more we understand about emotions, the better placed we are to cope with them and come through the other side. Let's start first, before we move on to the icebergs, let's start off with what are emotions, because it's a word that gets thrown around a lot, isn't it? Like, oh, how are you feeling? What do you feel like? What emotion are you experiencing? And that's very easy to say, but it can be very, very difficult to experience. And the more we understand what that is, then the more we are better placed to understand how we feel and find strategies that can support us with that emotion. So they're just a name we give to the way things feel in our bodies. Every emotion has a physical sensation, a physical feeling. So an emotion is a name we ascribe to that, and they help us to make decisions to stay safe, happy and healthy. So all of them are incredibly important. They can feel scary, especially those bigger and difficult emotions like sadness and anger, overwhelm, frustrated, unsure. They can feel very, very difficult to experience, especially if we've never felt that way before. And at the moment, I think a lot of us are experiencing whole new emotions that we've never experienced before. But, and here's the thing that Bridge the Gap do a lot of, and it's important for us to remember that emotions can be really fun. Exploring them really does help us to understand how they feel in our bodies and what they're telling us to do. It helps us to understand ourselves so much better and make choices according to those feelings and emotions. So for example, if you feel sad, it could be your brain's way of letting you know you need to ask a trusted adult or friend for a hug. So they're always telling us something. So it's important for us to try and find out what that is. So what I want to share with you now is a video from the film Inside Out. Hopefully you will have seen the film Inside Out, because I absolutely love it. But this is something that's really important to remember. There is no negative emotion. All emotions are really, really important to tell us things. So if we label them as negative, that can make us feel bad for feeling a particular emotion, when they all serve a very important purpose in our bodies. They're telling us things that we can do, things that we need to ask for. So it's important we recognise that every emotion is really, really important. So let's talk about this clip. So we'll play this now from Inside Out, and hopefully that gives you a little bit more understanding of why those big emotions are so important.
Oh, the stuffed animal Hall of Fame! My rocket! Wait, Riley and I were still using that rocket. It still has some song power left. Who's your friend who likes to play? No, you can't take my rocket to the top. Riley and I are going to the moon. Riley can't be done with me.
Hey, it's gonna be okay. We can fix this. We just need to get back to headquarters. Which way to the train station?
I had a whole trip planned for us.
Hey, who's ticklish, huh? Here comes the tickle monster. Hey, Bing Bong, look at this. Oh, here's a fun game. You point to the train station and we all go there. Won't that be fun? Come on, let's go to the train station.
I'm sorry they took your rocket. They took something that you loved. It's gone. Forever.
Sadness. Don't make him feel worse.
Sorry.
It's all I had left of Riley.
I bet you and Riley had great adventures.
Oh, they were wonderful. Once we flew back in time. We had breakfast twice that day.
Sadness.
It sounds amazing. I bet Riley liked it.
Oh, she did. We were best friends.
Yeah, it's sad.
I'm okay now. Come on, the train station is this way.
How did you do that?
I don't know. He was sad, so I listened to what...
Hey, there's the train.
Oh, we made it! We're finally gonna get home! Oh no, these facts and opinions look so similar.
Ah, don't worry about it. Happens all the time.
The important thing about that video is it was sadness that actually helped him move through, and that's really important. It's not joy that could fix that, it was sadness. And in that film, if you remember, Joy desperately tries to keep sadness in this circle away from everything else. Don't touch anything sadness, because she doesn't want sadness in Riley's life. But what that beautifully demonstrates is that sometimes it's sadness is what we need in order to move through a situation and emotion. It's not a bad thing. It's telling us that we need someone to help us with that release. Crying is not the hurting, it's the healing. So it's helping us to get through the emotion. Bearing in mind then, there's no negative emotion. They're telling us something, they're serving a purpose. So that's easy to understand. But what's more difficult is how do we learn to recognize that emotion, what it's telling us, and how do we unpick those bigger emotions, which is where the emotion icebergs come in. So very often the top of the iceberg is what we call, they're the secondary emotions. So there's always an underlying emotion underneath that. So you can see with these two icebergs, we have anger at the top and we have sad. For angry, for example, very often that will come out in behaviours such as we lash out, we scream, we shout, we slam doors, we push, we'll kick, we'll throw things. There's all sorts of things that we do when we're angry. And that happens to adults as well. That is not just children, that is everybody. And that's natural, because what is underneath that surface we easily ignore. But anger is very loud and it makes us pay attention to it. And what it's saying is you need to pay attention to what's going on underneath that. So for example, on here, we've got that someone might feel embarrassed. They might feel trapped. They might feel grumpy or tired. Maybe they feel overwhelmed. They might have thoughts such as things like, nobody takes me seriously. Have you ever had that when you're trying to explain yourself to somebody and they just aren't listening to you? You don't feel like you're getting heard, that they understand. And it makes those thoughts creep in of nobody takes me seriously. And physically in your body, you might feel hot. You might feel like you can't contain all of that energy in your body. That's very, very normal and natural. So although we're seeing angry at the top, there is always a why. So sad's at the top of the iceberg, the thing that we can see. So that might be someone being quite quiet, quite withdrawn. It might be somebody really clinging to that person that they love the most. It might be somebody struggling to sleep. It might be somebody very upset and crying. So sad is the thing that we're seeing at the top, the emotion we're seeing at the top. But underneath that, we have things like might be feeling rejected, ignored, unsure, lonely, helpless, guilty. And you might have thoughts such as things like nobody likes me. That could be the thought that comes into your head at that point. And physically, you might feel very tired, unmotivated, like you can't get up and do the things you want to do. You might feel like you've got no energy at all in your body. That's really, really normal and natural. And they're two very good examples. But what happens with us, because we're so busy, aren't we? And we don't really take a lot of time to learn about these things. Certainly for me, I didn't learn about them until I was an adult. About 7 years ago was when I specialised in this area. So having worked with children for all those years, and then I discovered this. And I thought, wow, now I understand myself a lot better. And, well, now I understand my children a lot better. And, oh, now I understand my husband a lot better and my work colleagues and my friends. Because once we understand there's always a why underneath those big and difficult emotions, the more easy it is to relate to people, but also to, most importantly, to relate to ourselves and not feel guilty for those behaviours that we do when we're at the top of that iceberg, but recognise them as something we need to stop and explore. So, angry, sad, how can you explore that at home? Let's have a look here. So here you have an anger iceberg, an emotion iceberg, but you could put anger at the top, you could put sad, any of those things we've just talked about. Now this is available for a free download on the website, but equally if you haven't got a printer or you want to create your own, that's great as well. You don't have to use ours, it's just an idea. So you could draw an iceberg and then you put the emotion you're feeling at the top, and if you're not sure what the emotion is that you're feeling, you could put the situation. It might be that you put mum and dad aren't listening to me, and that's what you put at the top. And then you can explore all the things that you feel, the thoughts that you're having, and you can just put them underneath and just get them out your head. Don't overthink it. It's about whatever comes to your mind. You might want to draw how you feel underneath instead. Sometimes that's easier to access rather than words. So it says at the bottom here, write how you feel at the top of the iceberg. Most commonly used are anger, anxiety, sadness. Then write or draw words, emotions, or detail some situations that are making you feel that way. Unbox how we are feeling, and this can lead to us to move through the emotion, just like sadness was doing, helping him to move through that emotion. From this, we might be able to say, oh, we can actually problem solve that. So that's an example of how to unpick. Now, grown-ups, we need to be doing this, because if we want our children to be able to access and explore how they feel, we need to get really comfortable with exploring it ourselves. So this is a great tool for anybody to help them understand how they're feeling and working through it. Now, the example I've got here is somebody did one on the coronavirus. So I'm just covering their name up. But here you can see underneath the word coronavirus, they've got no friends, lonely, worry, no dance, not seeing loved ones, confusion, difference, change, upset. And then what they've done down the side is they've written every single one of these things, and they've put a little bit about it, something they can do about it. Do you know, it is different for everybody. And the really important thing to remember is that all emotions pass. They never stay the same. We always move through them, especially if we've got those people to help support us through it, and if we have the tools to be able to explore how we feel underneath. Let me check the chat. Why are there bad things in the world? So I don't know why there are bad things in the world, and this is the honest answer, because bad things do happen, don't they? And that's really upsetting, and it can be really frightening and confusing. But what I do know is, for all the bad things that happen in the world, there are so many great and wonderful things. And I like to think that the bad things happen for a reason. It doesn't mean that, example, I was very, very poorly, probably 6 years ago now. And it was very, very upsetting and very difficult, and I didn't know what good could possibly come out of it. Bridge the Gap came out of that poorliness, and that's something that's really good that came out of it. We can't solve what else is going on. So if we start to worry about things we can't control, like why are there bad things in this world, I don't think anybody will ever know the answer to that. But what we can control is our response to it. And by exploring emotions, exploring how we feel about the bad things in the world, can help us to move through and make plans to cope with situations when those bad things happen. But we'll never stop bad things happening. But what we can do is support each other and explore how we feel about them, and then how we respond to them, because that's what we have got control over. Let's answer another question. Absolutely, I get emotional some days, a lot of days actually. So yesterday was one of those days, and I'm quite honest about those days, because I think it's really important that we all understand that everybody has emotional days. We all have emotional days anyway, because our whole days are channeled by our emotions and how we feel. Those harder to cope with emotional days, absolutely I have. So yesterday I had them through technology issues, through feeling really overwhelmed with how much work I have to do, and frustrated because bad things are happening and it's really impacting the organisation that me and our whole team have built up so much. And I also felt guilty because I'm sat working from home instead of the office, and that, you know, is upsetting for my children when they want my attention. So I'm here, but then I've got to work. So that feels really difficult. So how I coped with that, interestingly, yesterday was I did a list. It's actually here. So first I brainstormed. So I didn't use the iceberg, but certainly I brainstormed. So I put overwhelm in the middle, and then I wrote everything around that was overwhelming me, and then I made a plan. And I made a plan using a list. But on our website there are lots of things that you can use to help plan and cope with those emotional days. Why do bad people not feel sad? That's a really interesting question. I believe that most people do feel sad, but a lot of people have had lots of different experiences that have made them incredibly unable to listen to their emotions and understand them. And certainly I know for our team who work in certain services, like the prison service, for example, a lot of those people didn't know they felt sad. They hadn't had enough experience exploring emotions and what it was going on in their bodies to recognize that those feelings were telling them something. So I do believe people feel sad. Of course, there's a very, very, very tiny minority of the world that perhaps don't feel that, but I think most people do, but they don't necessarily deal with that sadness in the right way. And so it comes out in other ways and behaviours that are not good and shouldn't happen. So I think everybody feels sad, but it's how we listen to that and respond to that sadness that's really important. I hope that makes sense. Any tips on how to control anger? The thing with anger is it's always something else. So my top tip to cope with anger is by exploring what's underneath. So by doing things like the emotion iceberg. So for example, this is a good example. What stresses are filling your bucket up? So say this is your bucket, emotion bucket, and then when it gets full and it overflows, it comes out in anger. It's important to try and work out what is filling your bucket up the most. So what's leading to that anger? So for example, it might be you struggle with maths. It might be, if it's me, struggle with technology, and all of these things. And if they all come into the bucket at once, it overflows and we come out in anger and explosion, in what we call flipping our lids. Now, what's important is the more we then, so for example, if I said technology and the feeling for that would be frustration, that we take some time to explore how frustration feels in our bodies. So for me, I stopped breathing properly. And I notice all of a sudden that I'm having to take big gaspy breaths. So I'll be typing away at the computer and all of a sudden I'll be, and I recognize now that that's my cue to stop what I'm doing and use a strategy, which we'll come on to in a moment, to help bring me back down. So finding things that then help to empty that stress bucket up. Does that make sense? So in order to deal with anger, we have to recognize what it is, what our triggers are, and try and recognize those physical cues. There are so many great resources on the website to help you do that, but it's understanding what are your triggers, how do they feel in your body, and the more you get used to understanding and recognizing those, the better. I was terrible at recognizing them. I was labeled an angry child. when I was young, because I really struggled with my emotions, and it often came out in me throwing things around my room, hurting people I loved. And I carried a lot of shame around about that for many years. But what I realise now is I don't need to feel ashamed. It's normal. We can't actually control our brain when it's right at the top of that anger. We can only control it when it's lower down. So the more we recognise what's underneath, learn to recognise those physical signs, the better placed we are for good outcomes. But be really kind to yourself. It's going to get better. It's going to get better. And we'll look at some things that perhaps might help you to empty your bucket, but they're very different for everybody. Let's answer a couple more questions. I feel sad or angry all the time. That's so hard, isn't it? And I can really relate to what you're saying, that you feel sad or angry all the time, because that's completely overwhelming and it consumes your whole thought process. What I would say, the first thing I'd say to you is be really kind to yourself. It's obvious that there's other things going on underneath your surface that it's just going to take some time to unpick. But it's going to get better. It's going to get better. And we can help you to make that better, and we can help you to work through and explore it. I never ever thought I'd be in the position I am now with the understanding of my emotions that I have, but I am. And I've, from the age of 8, really struggled with that. From 8 years old, incredibly overwhelming, lots of anxiety, lots of sadness, lots of anger. But the more I have understood as an adult what that is, the better placed I am. Now, as a child, that's even harder. A lot of adults feel angry and sad all the time, so it's not easy. And for you, when you're young, that's even harder, because the part of your brain that's responsible for actually controlling your emotion doesn't mature until much later. So the more we can do these things that we're talking about now at a young age, the better placed you will be as you grow up to understand and cope with those feelings, because we need lots and lots of repetition on everything. It's not enough to do one of these things once. We have to do them regularly to really sort of wire the brain to be able to access those at points of stress and anger and sadness. What I will say is that you would need a different strategy for coping for those at different points. There's something called the anger volcano we have on the website, and it talks about finding strategies. So at base level, we're nice and calm and relaxed, and we move up the volcano until it erupts. We would use different strategies at different levels of that volcano, and I'll give you some examples of those next. I hope that helps. But we so care about you. You're so valued, and I know it's hard, but it is going to get better. And if you need any support, Bridge the Gap are always there to help you. Okay, so going back again to this bucket, really, it's trying to identify what are your storm starters, if you like. What are the things? So this is for anger, but equally you could relate that to anxiety or sadness. When something is hard to do. So for me, technology. Why is that not working? I can't understand why that's not working. It says if I do A, B, and C, that this should happen. Why is that not happening? That's incredibly infuriating for me, and a definite storm starter. I'm tired, hungry, or thirsty. Another huge trigger for me. Another huge thing that will fill my bucket. When my feelings are hurt, so whether that's something a friend said, something a grown-up has said, my mum or dad, or something that I feel like I've done to myself and I feel guilty. If you're embarrassed when I don't get what I want, so I want technology to work and it doesn't, that gets me very angry. When something is unfair, so you feel like you've tried your hardest and you've not had that recognition that you feel you deserve, that can be a storm starter. What I will say on that is make sure that the most important thing is that you feel proud of what you've done, and you're doing it for you and yourself and not for that validation from other people. If you get in trouble, so especially if we feel again like that's unfair, but also if you've just made a mistake and you need somebody to sit down and talk it through with you, but instead you feel like you're getting shouted at and screamed at when you're so confused about why you feel angry, and you try hard and it doesn't work out. So all of those are some potential storm starters. Can you get rid of all of your sadness? Absolutely you can't, and we shouldn't try to, because sadness is really, really, really important. Without sadness, there's no happiness. They have to coexist together. If you imagine what happiness feels like and how amazing that is, how would we know that's what happy is if we didn't feel sad? And sad is telling us something. So at the moment for you, if you're feeling sad and angry a lot of the time, it's saying that you need some support. You need some support in exploring what's underneath and some strategies to help you cope through. We need sadness. It's really important. There's that saying, life is a roller coaster, and it's so true. We have feelings of exhilaration and high, but equally we have feelings of low. But without the feelings of low, you don't get the high. And if you try and numb the sadness, you also numb the good stuff. So it's really, really important that we have all emotions. That there's some difficult emotions to cope with, and sadness is definitely a difficult one, and happy is far easier. But we still need it, and we need to find ways to recognize it, learn to sit with it and cope with it, so we can come through it. And we can, as I keep saying, but we can help you with that. Okay, let's move on. Why does this do this? See? Storm starter. I'm having a storm starter right now. Let's try again. Problem solve. Aha. So what can we do? There are so many different strategies out there. There's not a one size fits all, because what works for one person would not work for another person. And that's really important to recognize. So a lot of this is experimenting and find out what works for you. It's worth talking about that perhaps some of these things might work for a little bit, but then they might not work in a couple of weeks' time. And that's okay. It doesn't mean they've not been very important, and it doesn't mean they might not work again in the future. But it's about building a toolkit of things that we can go to and try. There are so many resources on our website to help you with that, but here are a few examples that I wanted to share with you. So talking it out. Talking it out can be a good thing. If you are not sure though what you need to talk about, because you're a little bit further up that iceberg than that, then that's not very useful. But what I do say is a really good thing to do is you can draw it out, even if it's just a case of just scribbling circles on a piece of paper. There's one on the website where you just draw circles, lots of circles, and then within that I wrote words, things that were coming to my head as I'd been drawing, and that's just helping us to get our emotion out, bring it back down to a lower level so that we can try some other things. And what I actually did with that afterwards, I can just remembered now, that's why I can't find it, is I ripped it up. And I ripped it up into lots and lots of little pieces, and that itself was very, very therapeutic and helped me to move through. So that's a really good strategy. Taking a walk, even when we don't feel like it, because often we don't feel like doing these things when we're there, it's making ourselves do them anyway. So taking a walk can really make a big difference to how we're feeling, and just helping us to change our mindset. Often when we're walking, our brain processes things and we can learn to problem solve. You know, the usual kind of squeezing a squishy toy, taking slow breaths. Now, breathing, really, that's only helpful if you practice it when you feel nice and relaxed. We've got some breathing cards on the website that you can download. They're free, and it has lots of different breathing types on there. Now, if you can, don't know if you can see those. If you can practice these when you're feeling not too stressed, not too at the top of the volcano, you'll then be able to access these as a coping strategy when you're higher up the volcano. Grounding, there's lots of information on grounding on the website. Stamping your feet, reminding yourself that moments pass, this moment passes, but the only way out of it is to go through it, like the bear hunt. And we can't go over it, we can't go under it, have to go through it. Drink some water, so have a drink. Play is a very natural stress reliever and helps us to move through emotion. Tapping, so tapping on our bodies, tapping on tables, making a list like I did yesterday, looking at favourite photos. If you've got lots of favourite memories you've got, making a lovely photo album or a scrapbook and then putting those into a relaxation kit. But in here I've got like a little tub of Lego, so that's just like a Tupperware pot, but I've just put a little bit of Lego because if I just have to go to my kit, if I'm recognising those feelings, I can build something, and that really helps. I have a book that's just it's not a storybook, it's just a book I can dip into and read a couple of pages of. My word search book is on my bedside, but I love a word search, so something that helps me to calm down. I have lots of buttons in mine. I love collecting buttons. I love sorting them. In our mini relaxation kits that we're sending out, and it has a little feather in. It has, which is my favourite, a ribbon. Now this is a piece of ribbon and it's scented with essential oils, because smell is a really useful tool to help us cope with difficult emotions. This one's peppermint, and it's just a ribbon, and I just like to fiddle with it. So I like to fold it, run it through my fingers. So if I'm feeling a little bit stressed and overwhelmed, maybe I'm struggling to sleep, maybe I just need a bit of help, there's not something I can problem solve, it's an emotion I have to sit with, having something like this can help me just to sit with that emotion until it passes, because it always does. Our brain just needs time to process it. It's also got a little marble in, it's got some stickers, and it's got a little book talking through some breathing strategies, a bit on the grounding technique. So there's that. So there's lots of things and ideas, but you will probably find lots of things that work for you. There's not a one size fits all. Grounding, let's answer that for you. Grounding can mean lots of different things. So we utilize it as grounding to the earth, and the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique, thinking of 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. On the website there's a sheet to help you remember that, and at first you can take that sheet out and about with you and use it as a prompt to practice, because as I say, we need to practice all of these things regularly to be able to access them at a point of crisis. So when we're at the top of that volcano, at the top of that iceberg. Other things that can be, in terms of grounding, can just be things like having a favourite blanket that you wrap around you. That can feel quite grounding. Scent, so if you've got an essential oil diffuser, or maybe your favourite bath bomb scent, and you can have a bath bomb in your relaxation kit to just smell. It can be things like observing a corner of the room and just describing it to yourself in your head. It could be things like counting up in 7s or counting back from 100. Things that basically remind you that you're you, that this is an emotion that's going to pass, but you're you and you're real and you're human and you're going to get through this. And it just helps you, your brain, to come back to that present state of mind, that moment. So it's something that helps you to feel more present. So I hope you found it useful. I hope it's given you an introduction to what emotion is and how to explore it, and that there is no fix it for emotion. We have to learn to read it. There's no negative emotion. It's all really important. The more experience we get at dealing with that emotion, the better placed we are to move through it. Is there anything you recommend for parents to read to help us understand this more? Yes. So on the website, there's a brief introduction to emotional literacy booklet that you can download and read that. Never feel like you're on your own, whether you're a child or a parent. We're here to support you. So do take care of yourselves. I hope you found it useful, and we'll see you again, hopefully very soon. Bye, everyone.